Hey everyone ever, and welcome to 20th Century Popcast, the show where we try to understand the present while living in the past. My name is Tim Blevins. My co-host is normally Bob Canning, and this is Thursday morning, which normally means a new episode of the show goes up. But this week, no, we don't have our planned 75th anniversary episode up yet, but I tell you it will be up next Thursday. So in the interest of keeping this a weekly show, we're bringing you, the listener, a sort of summertime rerun in the form of a self-indulgent past episode that has gone up once in the past. It's an old one from early in this show's run, back in March 2nd of 2017. And it's an episode that is very much about Bob and I, who we were, how we got where we are, and the pop culture that sort of reflected this at the time. Typical topic for the podcast, but also hopefully insightful, maybe. And it's from early on. You know, this is an old one, so the audio quality may display this, but I think it's still an interesting episode and one that helped shaped, again, where this particular podcast, 20th Century Popcast, has been heading. And speaking of that word, podcast, and not so much smooth segues, if I could cross-promote myself for a second here, next week, starting on Tuesday, I think it's August 7th, if I'm doing the date right. I should have written that down or looked at a calendar. But yes, next Tuesday, I will be guesting on the Movie by Minute podcast, Flash Gordon Minute. It's a 3 times a week podcast that dissects and discusses the 1980 live-action sci-fi film Flash Gordon, and it does so 1 minute at a time. It's produced by two-time guest of the show, Jarf Hardeen, hosted by Brad Mendehalland, who has also appeared on the show in the past, and whose last name I may have mispronounced then as well. Sorry, Brad. But it's a really fun program. I was fortunate enough to be on 3 episodes of it. So I'll link to their main website in the show notes for this episode, and would implore you to check it out next week. But first, this week on this show, enjoy something you may have already heard. And then next week, join us as we celebrate 75 of these sorts of episodes. Discounting this week as one of the counted episodes. Discounting this week's. So, not 76, but 75 because you're subtracting this one. Arbitrary numbering is the best. I thought today, or I know today, because we're both prepped for it, what we could do. There are key moments in the movies and TV shows from my youth that I remember because they struck a chord. They pierced something, they punctured something, and I grabbed onto them because these were movies that I identified wholeheartedly with. These are movies that spoke to me and in some way informed and influenced where I was at the point of my life when I was seeing this. So I thought today what we could do is we'd go back and forth and talk about some of these images, and they may not be from our most favorite movies. They may not be from the most influential television programs of our youth, but what they are images from movies and TV shows that struck us at the right time, that we felt like that was a representation of who we are in that minute. In describing that to you right now, does that resemble how I described it to you before the show?
I think you described it much better just now than prior to now.
Now, are you regretting your decision?
I don't know that I'm regretting my choices. I still think it fits. I may have tried to get different pictures, although I'm only limited to what I could find on Google.
Exactly.
But no, I think that was a good explanation of what I actually came up with, and I'm curious to see how it fits. Your pictures fit in with that definition.
Sure. And what I'll do is, in the show notes for this episode, however it is you get the podcast, there are show notes attached to it. I'll put links to all of these images that we're talking about so that you can have a better sense of what Bob and I, what we're talking about. But I chose an image. There's a movie from 1984 called The Last Starfighter. Are you familiar with it?
I am. I've seen it only a couple times. That might be something I'd like to reacquaint myself with.
No, I would love to go back to it because it's been a while since I see it. But The Last Starfighter, it's a movie about a kid on Earth who plays video games who gets drafted into this intergalactic army to go fight aliens in another sector of space. Blah blah blah. But in 1984, I wasn't aware of it from commercials. I didn't see it in the theater. I didn't see trailers. What I saw is comic books at the time had a full page ad. For this movie, the Last Starfighter. So on the back of issues of, say, Star Wars and Transformer comics, which would have been the comic books I was buying in that day, there was this image. It was a nighttime image. It was like a long street stretching into the background, kind of like the Close Encounters poster. And in the foreground on the street was these two human teenagers, a guy and a girl. And the guy, I think he's just wearing like flannel. Maybe he's holding something in his arm. The girl's holding onto his arm, and they're standing there in the foreground. And he's kind of looking up in the air, kind of pondering the future. And behind him, and the rest of the poster, is this alien face is sort of superimposed. You see stars. You see strange insignias, and it's just there was this idea of a small town Earthling who was going to be off to something bigger, similar to Luke Skywalker when he's staring at that binary sunset. But this was set in 1984, the present. Looking at it kind of fed into my 8-year-old feeling of wanting something bigger, daydreaming of greater things at the time. I probably pretended I was a defender, a hero, or some sort of a sci-fi character. And in that summer of 1984, seeing that picture and not having anything to attach it to because I didn't know the plot of the movie, it just filled me with the sense of I have to get out, get out of my small town and be bigger than I am.
Wow. I like that. When I saw the picture, because you had sent it to me ahead of time, I really was curious to see how it tied in with your life. Because it's not like we were, you weren't an alien starfighter. It's interesting too that you talked about a picture that meant something to you that was about bigger and better things. Because as I was thinking about these things, I had a couple options of my own that sort of were about that as well.
What's the first image that you picked? If I go through the shuffle through the images you sent me, would it be?
It would be. I picked this image from the movie When Harry Met Sally.
Yay.
Yeah, which 1989.
1989.
And I don't know if I saw it in 1989. I may have. I didn't see it in theaters, so chances are I didn't see it in 89.
But you were aware of it in 89,
yeah, I was aware
right?
of it in 89 for sure. Mm-hmm. And I must have seen it soon thereafter. I might have been a sophomore in high school, so that would have been 90, 91.
Sure.
And I very much enjoyed it. Loved it. In fact, it became one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, that's one we should do. We should go back to that fucking movie. I haven't seen that in a while.
I've seen it a lot, but not recently.
But let's talk about the picture for a minute. The image that I got, is that the one you intended?
Yes. So it is when they're I believe they're in a Sharper Image store, which I don't think, do those exist anymore? Sharper Image?
They do. I'm banned for life, but they do.
Okay.
Because I unvibrated a vibrating chair. But yes, they're still around, I'm sure. But people know, like just a glitzy, I almost feel like it's like men's gizmo store, which is incredibly sexist.
Yeah, like a gizmo store. Yeah, they've got those massage chairs. And in this scene, that I think everyone who has seen the movie will remember that Harry, Billy Crystal's character, is singing in a home karaoke machine. So the picture is him singing Surrey with a Fringe on Top in the Sharper Image with Sally.
Very current choice at the time. Big radio
Huge.
hit.
But see, that's why it connected with me. Because at that time, I felt like, even though, Harry, like, I don't know, he might have been in his 30s in this movie. To me, he felt like he could have been 50. You know, everybody was so much older. But but to me, this little high school kid, I felt like I was Harry, and not just he's singing "Surrey with a Fringe on Top" in this scene. He's with a female best friend, and I felt like I had a lot of female best friends in high school that weren't my girlfriends, and I never even connected that they could be my girlfriends. And I was into musicals. I knew Oklahoma, and I loved Guys and Dolls, and I will always love the film version of Paint Your Wagon with Clint Eastwood and Lee Marvin. Um, and it just I connected to this movie so much, and I shouldn't have. I don't think I should have as a sophomore in high school, but I really, really did. Um, and that scene especially, I just felt like I was that kind of person that would, uh, and I still kind of am, the kind that would embarrass myself solely, really to embarrass the person I'm with, just to make them laugh, just to have fun, just to be silly, and do it with somebody that's my best friend. It was just, yeah, it was a great scene, and that's why I picked that picture because it just really connected with me.
It is a flirty scene, right? He is flirting with
Well,
her in that
it,
scene,
I
correct?
mean,
Like I
he's
know they're friends.
constantly flirting with her throughout the movie. You know, even when they've decided they're just going to be friends, he's just.
Yeah.
He, I mean, I don't know if you could call it, if you want to call it flirting, but he's being himself. You
Mhm.
know, and I think that's the best way to flirt is to just be who you are, and then if you connect with that person, all the better. And that's what I liked about it. Like he's just being himself, and I felt like I could just be myself, like Harry. Like why not?
And you were in high school, right? You were the eighth, ninth grade,
Yeah, I was probably
maybe.
in 10th grade when I really
Yeah.
saw it. And I even remember we went on a youth trip. I was in a youth group and we went to I think New York City to deliver some I guess it was food or I don't know what we had collected. I can't recall that part. But one aspect of the trip that I really enjoyed is that we got to stay in a hotel room and there were like 4 or 5 hotel rooms for the group of us, and we were just all jumping back and forth. And in one hotel room were the group leaders, the adults, and they were watching When Harry Met Sally, and that's the room I sat in. I had already seen the movie at that point, and and they happened to be watching it, and I stayed in that room watching Harry Met Sally. And every time like one of the other kids showed up, I was like, "Dude, you got to stay and watch this fantastic movie, which you won't really care about, I don't think, because you're you know 14." But
But I know that feeling. Wasn't I feel that was great. I feel like the high school discovery of what an adult could be. And
yeah,
again, these are cinematic adults. They're not necessarily real adults, but this idea that they're not married, they're not the father from some sitcom. They're not, they're not working necessarily an office job, but they're struggling with relationships. That spoke a lot to me in high school. I mean, when Harry Met Sally, that I like the image you picked. If I had picked an image from that movie, I would have picked probably the split screen where he's in bed talking with her because he's so dour and sad and everything in that scene.
yeah,
I think that hit me. But yeah, I think seeing adults in movies was and on TV shows was so liberating in a way, and so I don't know. It motivated me to talk better. It motivated me to be funnier. It motivated
yeah.
me to interact. And in the end, I think for both of us, heterosexually being attracted to women, these kind of movies spoke to us where it's kind of like, this is how you talk to women. This is how
Yeah.
I'll distinguish myself from the rest of the school.
And it's truly
I
what
find
I did do that. Like I tried to talk like Billy Crystal, and I got into Billy Crystal, and then from that Robin Williams more, and just that kind of comedy, and Harry Connick Jr. entered my record collection. That was one of the first CDs I bought. Actually, was the Harry Connick Jr. We Are in Love, which I think was his second or third album. But I also got the Harry Connick, or excuse me, the Harry Met Sally soundtrack, and yeah, I was the guy that was listening to big band and musicals, kind of from watching When Harry Met Sally.
yeah, no, these things do influence us. I was curious if you had been watching musicals before the movie, but
Yeah, I had been.
It would make sense. All of that's kind of tied together. That's, I mean, if
Yeah,
that was what triggered you to get into Harry Connick Jr., that would totally make
yeah.
sense. The next image is my second image is very similar actually to what you just described. It's from a TV show. Early 1990s, I discovered on TV my favorite sitcom of all time, and it was fronted by my favorite comedian of all time. There was a TV show called Anything But Love. It was a 1990s ABC office set sitcom about two characters. Richard Lewis, stand-up comedian Richard Lewis, played a character named Marty Gold, and Jamie Lee Curtis from Halloween and Fish Called Wanda and so many other things played Hannah Miller, another reporter at the Chicago news magazine. And the show was about the two of them as friends. Eventually, they started dating, but for the first two seasons, they were the guy and the girl, friend in the office, going through their lives but interacting. And the image that I meant to choose, and maybe I'll fix this versus the image that I sent you. Every episode of the show started with the two of them sitting in a diner, and it was just a very straight on shot, them at the table, and it was always they'd have a cup of coffee in front of them, and Richard Lewis would be on the right, Jamie Lee Curtis would be on the left, and they would just be talking. And it was just this image of the two of them at this counter, and he would basically be doing a routine for her. You know, they'd be talking a little mundane conversation, but it was basically a stand-up routine where he was just trying to make her laugh with intellectual sentence structure and smart, funny jokes. And it really was similar to what I think you saw in Billy Crystal. Richard Lewis was what I thought it meant to be an adult, you know.
Yeah.
He was a writer. He had, his political social stances, but he also went to therapy, and all these things came out, and these quips that he could do with his female friend, and the two of them were going to explore their life together. And this image of them sitting in this exotic place of a diner, because I never went to diners as a kid, and just sharing their day there on a stage, like the tabletop of it looked just like a stage, and having an interaction there. It was everything about it was like the perfect relationship without it having to say, hey, we're a relationship.
Yeah.
It was romantic without any affection. It was deep and meaningful more than any other friendship without saying, hey, we're exclusive. And that was how I wanted to be. That's how I wanted to sound, because I understood it. There wasn't this commitment and danger of being in a relationship, which I still had a lot of anxiety about, but it was just being the smart, funny best friend of this woman. And so that just struck me as that's how you exist. That's how you interact. And I mimicked that into the ground. I stole from it. I learned from it and eventually inhabited that role in more than a few friends' lives. And it's the image of that show. I loved this show, and I would tape it and rewatch it constantly, and then just played it. It was the kind of thing where I would go to bed listening to the show and imagining myself and my friends as the characters, almost like it's a stage play. And that image of the two of them at the diner set in motion what it was I pursued for 15 years, 20 years, unhealthily before I found a meaningful relationship. It really set that in motion. And it's such an impactful image that I'm sure I've struck that very same pose myself multiple times in my life.
I want to see that image. Yeah, I don't have the diner image. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is. I'll have to put that up
I'll
on
look at it
the show notes for you.
when I
Yeah.
re-listen to this. Yeah, that's interesting. That what was the year of Anything But Love?
It would have premiered in '89, so I must have been watching it there. But these episodes that I'm thinking of are 91.
What an
probably.
interesting
90 or 91.
What an interesting connection that you and I just had there. You with Richard Lewis, me with Billy Crystal, as our adult aspirations. It's like these are the men that we want to become. Around about the same time, in various comedy forms. That's very, very interesting. I did not know. I didn't make that connection. I knew you're a huge Richard Lewis fan, and Anything But Love fan. But yeah, I never made that connection that that you and I both had similar moments in our lives with these actors and these performances.
These comedians, yeah, these neurotic, mature single comedians. Do you think other people watched, like, Anything But Love was a show that I, maybe one or two of my other friends watched. Did you get the sense of how you watched and reviewing When Harry Met Sally, that other people in your grade and in your age bracket, that other people had that same experience?
The women did, the girls, I guess they were, but the women did. I remember connecting with various females discussing When Harry Met Sally, but none of the other guys that I hung out with at that time, that I know of. Now there were actually other. You know what? That's not true. And maybe it was a couple years later on in high school, because I ended up being in a vocal jazz group in high school, and the guys in that group, we all kind of had a similar vein when it came to romantic comedies and that kind of stuff. We weren't shy about our enjoyment of them, and we were in vocal jazz, so we all liked Harry Connick and other types of jazz and show tune music. So eventually I did, but not initially.
Yeah, there's something I feel, at least, that these things were my things. Last Starfighter, I felt the same way too. It's just like I didn't know, and there were other people experience these things. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do a show about it. But the Last Starfighter poster, but more so the Anything But Love imagery, and even When Harry Met Sally, because that was a big movie for me. I was very aware of it when it came out, wanted to see it, didn't till it was on videotape, which would have been the following year. But again, these were the movies that were teaching me how to be an adult. Not really, but what I thought an adult would be. And it egotistically, but also maybe just in a healthy way of, if I was going to they seem like intellectual things that other people weren't going to. And it helped me, feeling outside of the school, feeling like I don't connect with sports, not feeling like the nerd outsider, but just feeling like I was somehow fundamentally not connecting with my school, having these things to mimic and also to enjoy as entertainment, but to mimic in public. I think it empowered me in a way. What, moving forward from that, what's your next image? Would it be your second or third? I've already lost track.
It's the one from Friends.
Okay, so we're gonna move into college.
Yeah, I jumped to college. Yeah, I think that was an episode from season 3.
So what are we looking at when we look at this photo?
Well, this image that I took from Friends, it was very hard to find this image.
This wasn't just a chance discovery on Google. This is what you were looking for.
Yeah, and I don't know if it'll post well in the show notes, because it's a smaller image
post great
than the others. But I mean, you described this as something that we watched that immediately connected with us. That you had just this, like I say, immediate connection. And when I saw this episode of Friends and this story arc, I was kind of living that, and I could feel how Ross was feeling. And so let me backtrack a little. So what we're looking at in this image is Ross looking very uncomfortable as Rachel is hugging Mark, who just helped her get her new job, her first job out of from waitressing in the fashion industry and sales and fashion. And
I remember this. Ross and Rachel are dating at this moment.
Yes, Ross and Rachel are dating. And leading up to this image, Rachel happens to bump into Mark, who says, "Oh, I'll give you my card. I can set you up with an interview." And she gets really excited, and she tells Ross how excited she is. And Ross has a line that is something like, "Oh, that's great," and gives her a hug, and then something to the effect of, "Sounds like Mark wants to have some sex," or something like that.
Something, yeah. I do know that line, yeah.
Yeah. And, Rachel's like, "No, not at all." And, eventually Ross just gets jealous of the situation. And at my time, I didn't have something exactly like this, but I was in a similar situation where I was dating, and I had a girlfriend, and I was in college in Boston, and she was in college in Vermont. And our connection, I felt like I was losing my connection with her. And I felt like she was experiencing things and having these moments that she couldn't share with me because of our distance, and even communicating it to me just wasn't enough. and there were people there, and sometimes I could even hear them talking in the background. Not that they were living together. It's just this is a communal place, college. And so I just got this feeling like I don't know what these other men are planning, and I trust my girlfriend, but ultimately I'm not the one there connecting and doing things and helping her. And that made me very uncomfortable. And I could completely and utterly relate to how Ross was feeling during the story arc.
How empowering to have the hero of the show have to go through this too. I mean, we were talking last week about Friends, and Ross is one of the characters I think we both identified with, at least at this point in the series, right? That's why you would have chosen this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how validating in a way to find something you're enjoying, this TV show, this comical TV show that can present a painfully funny version of what you're going through. Of course you would gravitate to that. I mean, thinking about it now, yeah, that's probably why I couldn't have a mature relationship to the one I'm in, because of that exact mindset.
Exactly.
But it's funny. Yeah.
And it didn't help.
The image you picked,
yeah. Well, yeah, the image I picked, I think I kept going back to it. I almost used some other ones that were larger and I think presented better. But I had to go with this one because it's that exact moment where you're the boyfriend, but you really didn't do anything to help her in this situation, and you're not getting the hug some other man is.
It coincides. It seems like you were having these feelings before you saw the episode. It's not like the episode informed you that something could be up, right?
Oh yeah, like it was something I was already feeling, and so to see it manifested in a television show that I thoroughly enjoyed, it sort of it might have helped feed into it some more. I mean, eventually, I became kind of a clingy and overly excited and like I can't remember if it was during high school or college. It must have been college. There was a night where we kind of broke up, and she left my house in a car, and I ran to her house after we broke up. I can't believe I'm telling this story. I ran to her house and got to her house just as she was getting there in the car, because she had to like drop another friend off. So, and basically tried to win her back and tell her like it was, I can't remember exactly what we even talked about, but I knew I was like telling her it would get better and I would be better or whatever it was.
That's your TV moment. There's your TV.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff doesn't work outside of a program as much as you want to use someone as a prop in that. That's beautiful.
It sounds beautiful. But it was, in retrospect, really embarrassing and ultimately not beneficial to either one of us, because it kept us together for a couple more years that we could have been investing in ourselves and in other people.
Yeah, ouch, first of all. And the other is I'm filing away right now. I think a worthwhile episode in the future would be episodes of things we've tried to recreate that have backfired, because there are a few. But no, good choice with that. We were just talking about Friends last week on the show, and very timing wise, it works really well. Also, not a great emotion to emulate, so that's good. The next image I had follows along suit. I'm still in high school. These images for me are still in high school. It's a shot from my favorite movie of all time. My favorite film is a movie called L.A. Story, which is a 1991 comedy written and starring Steve Martin, directed by a director named Mick Jackson. It's a surreal romantic comedy about a weatherman who falls in love with this girl from England. And there's a lot of levels of comedy in the movie. Seeing it on the big screen was a revelation for me. I was a huge Steve Martin fan. Didn't emulate him, didn't mimic him, but just I always liked his humor, liked his comedy, liked his movies. So when LA Story was being advertised during episodes of Anything But Love in 1991, I saw the ads. I thought, oh, this would be great. It's another fun adult kind of, this is how adults live kind of comedy. Of course I want to go see this. So a bunch of friends and myself went to see it. And I have to say, seeing LA Story on the big screen was one of those experiences where the rest of the audience, my friends, everyone, they all kind of blocked out, of my view. And I was just so fascinated by this movie that could trans I don't know, transperse. What is it? Just cross all these different levels and genres of humor. There was dumb jokes, there was clever wordplay, there was surreal jokes, and there was a real beauty to it. It was a
Fantasy.
romanticized fantasy. Thank you. A very much a romantic fantasy. And the scene that the still that I pulled from this movie, it's Steve Martin's character and Victoria Tennant is the woman's character. They had they are attracted to each other, but they haven't gotten together yet, and they have a night that winds up through a bunch of different events. Standing in front of a freeway sign, a light up freeway sign, and she's talking to him with the sign behind her. He's looking at her, and the sign itself, which is I think something that's mainly used to broadcast, like road conditions and stuff. The text "Kiss her, you fool" is up in it. The street sign is telling the Steve Martin character, "Kiss her." And that to me is like this mystical romance. This
Yeah.
idea of romance as mystery, as magical, as forces at work. More so than anything but love, which was a realistic world kind of guy who's good at talking and good at his job. This one made true romance seem like magic. And it was this kind of thing where all the elements of the world work with you. Just the setting works in your favor. Other people work in your favor. The moment, and seeing this,
Weather.
the weather, exactly. All these things that would turn a real life romantic encounter. If you were to stage it for a camera, these are all the elements that go into it. So this image, this idea of everything working for you to get you with this one woman, I mean, that poisoned my mind in a way. It's a beautiful romantic movie, and it's nice to be romantic. It's fun to be romantic, but ultimately it's a little detrimental. And I think this image, again, if the anything but love image guided how I interacted with women, and how most of my friends, I had more female friends than male friends, but a lot of it was this weird kind of like, are we dating? Are we not dating? Do we want to date kind of thing? If that influenced that, this image just influenced my idea of what love had to be. It had to be all these mystical bells and whistles and swelling soundtrack and everything happening at once to create this single solitary moment, in time. And so I think with that in mind, once I got, through high school and then getting into college, the relationships I pursued, which weren't many, they were these prolonged, overly dramatic gestures. The whole like, under the bridge in Kenmore Square, or by moonlight in the backyard of someone's house, or, over a
Are you
toilet holding
saying
someone's hair back, whatever it was.
are you saying that Ellie's story uh, guided you? Because or were you already kind of feeling that that's what love should be, and it hit you at that time? You saw the movie at that time. Like that's what I'm trying to gauge here. Is it something that you already were,
No,
or
the movie triggered it. I think the movie triggered it.
yeah,
I think you and I have had this sort of differing views on things before too. I think a lot of times, I don't think it's easily separate. You can't separate it easily, but a lot of
yeah,
the things I get out of these movies are ways of looking at, ways of filtering feelings I have. I didn't know
right,
what love was in 1991 in 10th grade. I had no idea what romance was. I saw it in
right,
movies and it seemed engaging and I thought I wanted some companionship, but I didn't know how a relationship worked. Seeing this movie and seeing how it worked, the pursuit and everything he had to go through to get this girl and all the elements working with him, all of that was very attractive to me in a cinematic
yeah,
way. And so I think this filtered my idea that this is what love is. Love is all of the work that gets you there. Love is
yeah,
the working against the world, but with the world to be with this one person. So yeah, it definitely, it's not the movie's fault. Movies don't have a responsibility, but it's just
right.
I'm susceptible to that sort of lawless romance.
Yeah, yeah, and it's conscious and it's subconscious. Because as I'm sitting here listening to you and also looking at these images, and just in my head, kind of replaying the fact that I told that story about running
Yeah,
to
tell it
my girlfriend's
again. Yeah.
after we broke up. No, but I'm just thinking, Tim, at the end of When Harry Met Sally, what does he do?
Fucking
He
run.
runs.
Yeah. Was that in your head? That had to be in your head.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It was probably something subconscious in my head at that time, having seen these movies and being influenced and taught by them as to what you're supposed to do in a relationship and how you're supposed to be. I don't think I was thinking it at the time, but certainly now, what is it, like 86 years later, looking back on it, um, it's like, holy cow! Look at how that influenced that moment.
Yeah, we were lost morons who giant gestures, right? I mean,
What's one of your biggest gestures, Tim?
oh
Your
God.
post LA story gestures, without naming names or getting too
Yeah.
embarrassed.
Well, if the time lapse of a restraining order works. No, I had a friend. This sadly is a 21st century memory, but I'll share it anyways.
Yeah, we'll allow it.
2003. So what was it? Oh, thanks. So I was in my late 20s. No, I had a friend. She and I we were we probably had known each other at that point for 5 or 6 months. We were good friends, or maybe even longer. I think we got along well, and we eventually became just good friends. But there was this playful flirtation, at least that I perceived, without, and as was my way, never addressing it, never approaching it, never saying like, "Hey, do you want to go out?" Just letting it linger out there, so that if she or I, God forbid, dated someone, that person that we were dating in my mind was like the enemy. So one day, her and I were walking through the Boston Gardens, public gardens, and she said, "So what's going on?" She kind of initiated this conversation of, "It seems like
Ah,
we're both at times expressing this interest. What is that all about?" And normally, because that had happened before in that situation, I would feel caught. I'd feel like
right.
and fumbling, like, and have to backpedal. But something inside me, this honesty and this confidence kind of struck, rose up, and I was like, well, yeah, I think, I think we get along well. And like we sat down, we had a very mature conversation where I was like, I think we get along very well. I think we're good friends. I don't think we've ever addressed anything, and I think I'm jealous when you're with someone, but I don't know if that's a relationship. And she said, well, I don't think we're gonna date. She said, I think
Huh.
I'm with this person. I think I like you very much as a friend. I would hate to lose that if the relationship ended. And I remember telling her, and this surprised her. I was like, okay, I understand. I don't know if that is not how I feel, but I understand what you're saying, and I want your friendship. And she was very surprised. She thought I was very mature about it. She thought, she even said, "Wow, I would not have expected that. That's great." And she had to get to an acting class. She went on to her acting class. I went back at the time I was living in Cambridge. I went back into Cambridge, and along the way, riding the train back into Cambridge, my mind began replaying the scenario, and it started feeling like, what did something go wrong? Suddenly I started thinking like, wait a minute, we just had this conversation where we said we don't want to date because we'd hate to one day break up. And I started thinking like, never really talked about it before then. And that's when my mind switched to, you never told her that you wanted to date beforehand. You never expressed it to her, was the idea. And I started in my head building up this idea that, well, yes, you just talked about why you didn't want to date, but you never actually officially told her that you did want to date her. So by the time I got into Cambridge, my mind was sort of in this sweeping gesture mode of, you have to show her. You have to show her how you feel. Then she'll know. Then she'll know. So at the time I was working at this coffee shop, the 1369 coffee shop, and I ran into this coffee shop, and I went in the back, and they had this little boom box, this little battery powered, plug in the wall boom box. So I grabbed that. I said, I need to borrow this. So I took that outside, but I realized that it has a cord. Where are you going to plug it in? So I went and I bought batteries, and those kind of boom boxes take, I think, D batteries, some sort of sizable battery. So I bought the batteries and I slammed them in there, and I ran to my apartment and I dug through my CDs thinking, what would tell her? What would tell her? What would tell her what I felt? And I thought this would be quirky, right? And I pulled out Magnetic Fields album, the 69 Love Songs album. And there's a song in that called Nothing Matters When We're Dancing. Do you know that song?
I don't, sadly.
Okay, it's a sweet little ukulele song, some cute lyrics, and I put that CD in, and my idea was, you know what, I'm gonna make the grand gesture. I think the problem is I never made a grand gesture. I'm gonna make the grand gesture for her. So I knew she was gonna be getting out of her acting class. So as it was getting dark, I had just gotten my first cell phone, so this must have been 2003. I had my first cell phone. Rushed down on the train. I ride the red line into Boston because she was living in somewhere off of Charles Street at the time. Get off the train and I dial up her number. She answers. She's like, "Hello," and I'm like, "Hey, it's me." Obviously, she's like, "Yeah, what's up?" It's like, "Well, I was thinking about what we were talking about before," and it was silent on her end. I was like, I would you? And she's like, well, "Okay, what's up?" And I was like, "Well, would you mind meeting up with me? I wanted to ask you one more thing. I just wanted to ask you something." She's like, "Well, why can't you ask me?" I'm like, "Well, what if we just met? What if we just met in the Commons? You want to come to the Commons? I could ask you a question." She's like, "Well, what do you want?" I was like, "Look, I just need to talk to you for a minute." She's like, "All right, I'll come meet you." So she came down from her apartment, and by that point, I had somehow gotten myself a rose. I probably just bought it or plucked it, and I had the boom box. And
You grew it in that time, and everything that you're doing in this amount of time. I'm sure you had time to also grow the rose.
blood, sweat, and tears is a very good sediment. But she came out of her apartment and she stepped out, and I'll never forget it. She turned to face me, and her face went white, and her eyes locked on the boombox that I was struggling to hold, shifted for a moment, probably to the flower I was holding, and then looked up to greet my dumb face, which was already registering that she was very uncomfortable. And she was like, "What are you doing?" And because my idea was, I would say I'd never made, I had a whole speech of how I would say I'd never made the grand gesture, and I would hit play on this, and the song would play, and we'd do a little waltz in the park. That was my idea. But we were on Charles Street, which is a weird angled street. I said, "Can we just go to the park?" I said. And she looked so scared. She looked so like someone had just become unhinged. She's like, "No." And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 no," is what I started telling her to try to assure her. "It's not this." And I gestured at the boombox. And this is for you. And I kind of had the flower. And she's like, "No, Tim, we already talked about this," she said. I was like, "I know. Let's just go to the park." I was so locked into this idea of staging this dumb little romantic escapade that I would never tell anybody about while speaking into a digital microphone 15 years later, that I was so certain that that was the big gesture. And in a movie, it probably would have been a nice little image. But in real life, it felt like my first real psychotic break. Like it really felt like that. Because she went back in her place, and I had to turn around and stumble to the train. And I really was thinking, what the fuck did you do? Why did you? What did you? What happened? Because it was the perfect example of being deluded by television, thinking things will work out like TV or movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she laughs about it now. We've since discussed it, and we were friends again, and all of that. But it's one of those things where that is me trying to live out. And that was a very long story. I'm sorry, that took forever to tell, but trying to live out one of these fucking movie scenes. And it's weird because I think fixating on them, like having certain of these images ingrained in my head for so long, you almost forget how the person gets in and out of that scene. So there's no way to integrate it into the real world.
Yeah, you can't just fade to breakfast the next morning.
No, you cannot. No, and especially if they're not with you the next morning, you're just fading to yourself licking ash out of a Coors can. Oh, but embarrassing! I mean, very embarrassing. And shared here on the internet,
as it should be,
as it is,
as it should be.
Yes,
as it has been done. But better to have done it than to have regretted not doing it.
She was very forgiving. Otherwise, no. But yeah, okay. but think about how much faith, or whatever the word is, how much pressure you and I put on these movies. I mean, the movies aren't sentient things, but. And I'm speaking for you, so correct me if I'm wrong. There's an used to be. Yes, I'm past this now, but there used to be an expectation, and it started with the John Hughes movies, in the 80s, but there used to be this expectation that I could live and would live my life like the movies I watched. That was the only way to communicate, to exist, and that I would do that. And that really is treating people like props, and not allowing them
Yeah,
space. It's working from a
yeah.
script, really.
That was a life I lived. I mean, that was a life you and I lived. I think
Yes,
we've
for a very
acknowledged
long
that.
time.
Yeah. Um, have we grown? I think I've grown. I'm a little bit past that. I feel like I'm past
And it
that.
feels like a loss. Like I will say, I am past that. I don't stage things. I might act them out in my head, in little fantasies, but I don't actually actively think I'm going to go, because I'm not pursuing anyone. I'm actually in what's considered a mature relationship, and that's good, but I will say, if I'm watching a movie and I get worked up by it, or if I get lost in a romantic movie, or I'm constantly surprised at how, like, sitcoms and TV shows I watch to this day, emotional moments will always get me. I miss,
Yeah.
because I don't have this anymore. I do miss the playing in the mind of the pretend, or the inserting of myself into that role. I miss that. And I do miss the living of the dialogue kind of thing. All these images we're talking about. I miss trying to recreate those because it was fun. And the emotions were real.
Yeah.
They may not have been what I thought they were, but there is something about, going back. I always go back to fucking Anything But Love, and I'm like, that is what I thought my life would be. Me bantering with my female best friend, and I had it for a long time. And then it didn't, that alone doesn't satisfy forever, because eventually it is just a performance, and either the person moves on, or you run out of things to say, or something changes in it.
Yeah. I think I've done that with my wife, who yeah, like our early relationship was very much that banter and that that I don't want to say it's an act, but it's definitely an exaggeration of yourself. And you kind of can feel it. It makes I don't know if you really are saying things smarter and funnier, but you feel like you are in those
Well,
moments, at least for me.
yeah.
And and for my time, I mean, I've been with my wife now for 17
Her
years,
name is mentioned in The Usual
and
Suspect episode.
you were supposed to edit that out.
I believe it's at the 32-minute mark with 11 seconds. But I'm sorry.
I don't want my other wife to know.
Does she have the internet?
No. Um, I've lost my train of thought now. What was I trying to say? We've just gotten so used to each other. I think we don't have to do that anymore. I mean, we'll have moments where it feels like it, that that old us is there, but we're just so already we know each other so well that we don't even have to do the bits, I guess.
See, you keep saying we don't have to. Like, I never felt like I had to. When I found the person who could do the bits with me, who I could banter with, I loved that. Like, I locked into
Yeah.
that. I think you and your wife, because through the duration of time and the maturity of growing up, and maybe the fact that because of eventually you go into reruns, but I feel like these things, these steps, like, what shows were I never interested in? I wasn't the biggest fan of, say, Mad About You, which was a show about a happily married couple. I liked it, but once they had a kid, I stopped watching it. What's a movie I never want to watch? A movie about parents raising a child. Like, that angle wasn't something that had the banter to it. The closeness of a
Yeah.
mature relationship that has lasted a long time and doesn't have to always struggle with the bumps of half an hour of drama isn't a television program, isn't something I was aiming for. Now that I finally have it and it's all new to me, that's great. I'm not doing the bits. I'm not recreating the drama of getting there. But I used to love doing that, and you and your wife bantering, or doing bits and routines. Like, I can't speak highly enough for the relationship I'm in. It is unlike anything I've ever been in. prior to it, all of my relationships were these drama bombs of things, were these sitcom performances. And even this relationship now started as one, but it's matured into something else. Part of what drove those other relationships, I think, was the need to, or the want, now I'm saying the want to act out, to act out my episodes as I try to discover feelings. And I lucked out if I clicked with someone who did the same.
Yeah.
But that's not bad. I don't think that's bad. It's unhealthy. No. It's unhealthy and you miss out, but it's not bad.
It's how we just developed into these roles, into these personalities, and into our lives, I think, and the pop culture that we grew up with was a big influence on that. And thankfully, I think we have some things that influenced us that are decent and wholesome and humorous.
I like one of those words.
Thank God we weren't,
humorous, sure. Wow. What a bunch of posers we are, just ripping off our entertainment.
Right?
So, I mean, again, it makes sense.
I didn't even, and that's not even how I approach this, as you were putting the idea out there of finding these images that connected. But clearly, that's what it is.
Wait, how did you approach it? What did you think the episode was going to be?
Well, I didn't think it was going to be about us, like you're calling us posers, which clearly we were.
Well, that's I waited to the end to say that, but yeah,
I thought it would just be, I thought it would be more like the Friends image, where you just connected with it, and not so much where all these other images that we've pulled up and talked about from films that or TV shows that we either were trying to be or wanted to be, and that's not the route I thought this podcast would take, this episode, but I enjoyed it.
Oh, good. No, I did too. And again, I like re-examining how these things impacted, and for good and for bad, and for some of those relationships I should apologize for. Well, great. That was good. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I like these kind of going off the rails a little bit from the other episodes that we have rotating.
Yeah, well, and it calls into question, should the thing just be called 20th Century Popcast every time? But no, we've talked about that before. Rotating names, and I guess is fine, as long as people have one central hub to look it for, which is the segue into plugs. If you like this show, if you third like this show, want to hear more of it, or just want to get updated every time an episode appears, which should be every Thursday, you can follow us at 20popcast.com. I say follow, but that's actually a website, so you can visit it. Every time an episode gets updated, it goes up there. There's a player right on the page you can listen to. Also, hopefully, coming up soon, I'm going to start trying to put more articles and things up just about the stuff that we're talking about. There's something to read. If you'd like to subscribe to your podcast so they automatically update, and if you use iTunes, 20th Century Popcast is now on iTunes. There's a link in the show notes to that, so you can subscribe. Still working on getting it up on Stitcher, Google Play, and a couple of other sites. We'll keep trying with that. We have a Facebook page. Please like us on there. And myself, Tim Blevins, you can always follow at Subcultist. That's on Twitter, Twitter page. Follow me there, and you can learn everything else that's going on in my life. I also have an Instagram account. I'll link to that because the images we were talking about on this episode, I'll post them up on Instagram so you can see each one that we were talking about. Bob, talk about yourself.
Only a little bit. You can follow me on Twitter at RH Canning. It's RH Canning on Twitter. And I'm going to reiterate, I want some letters. I want some tweets and questions. So feel free to drop those there. And what do you think about this? I can hashtag them at 20popcast.
That's great. Please do. Popcast. That's wonderful. Also, the 20popcast.com has a Pop Talk section in the menu that should be up and running soon, and that's a place where you can just submit any questions you want us to answer on the air or on the line. But yes, I like the idea.
Or topics you want us to
talk about. Yes, all those things are very true. Boy, if those plugs made sense, that was a lot of good information. If not, We won't get any letters. But yeah, I think things are going well. We'll see you again next week. Trying to think of an episode I could recreate right here that would be hilarious. I don't have it, so I'm just going to say see you next time, everyone. Catchphrase!